Picture this. You've spent years fighting to save a dying world. You've lost almost everyone you love along the way. And in your final moment, the moment you're supposed to die alongside the last shred of hope for humanity, something happens instead. You wake up. 13 years in the past, young again, powerless again. But you remember everything. That's the premise of today's anime, and I have to be honest with you. It's one of the best premises I've come across in this genre in a long time. Today we're reviewing A Returner's Magic Should Be Special, the fall 2023 fantasy anime produced by Arvo Animation, directed by Taishi Kawaguchi. Whether the show fully lives up to it? That's a more complicated answer. Let's get into it. Our protagonist is Desir Arman, a magician who, alongside a small party of remaining heroes, fights to defeat the being responsible for the Shadow World, an ever-expanding dimension of darkness that has already consumed most of humanity. They succeed. Sort of. The enemy self-destructs in its final moments, and Desir tries to analyze and invert the spell to survive. He wakes up 13 years earlier, right as he's first enrolling at Hebrian Academy. Young, weak, completely unprepared for what's coming, but carrying every memory of a war that, from his perspective, has already happened. This is what's known in the genre as a regression story, increasingly popular in Korean web fiction, and the core hook here is genuinely compelling. Desir isn't trying to save himself. He's trying to rebuild the team that died protecting the world the first time, gathering allies like the hot-headed mage Romantica and the swordsman Pram, forming a club at the academy to train them into the heroes he already knows they can become. It's less of a solo power fantasy and more of a team-building story, which, if you've seen a lot of reincarnated with future knowledge anime, is actually a refreshing structural choice. So let's talk characters, because this is where the show starts to show some cracks. Desir himself is an interesting lead on paper. A man carrying the weight of a war no one else remembers, trying to quietly manipulate events from the shadows to save people who don't know they need saving. There's real potential in that internal conflict. Romantica and Pram, his two closest companions, both have compelling backstories buried in this world, but the anime's pacing doesn't always give them the room to breathe that those backstories deserve. And then there's the wider cast, the elitist alpha-class students, the good teacher, bad teacher dynamic, the strong but silent ice mage archetype. These aren't necessarily bad characters, but they lean heavily into familiar genre archetypes without doing a whole lot to distinguish themselves. If you've watched a few Academy Fantasy anime before, you'll recognize almost everyone here within the first couple of episodes. Now, to be fair, there's real quality here too. The animation, particularly early on, is genuinely strong. The magic effects have a vibrant, almost alive quality to them, and the character designs, while familiar, are polished and visually appealing. When this show is firing on all cylinders, it looks great. The core concept of regression through team building is also something this genre doesn't do often, and it's a smart structural choice that sets this apart from a lot of its competitors. Desir's motivation, saving people rather than just gaining power, gives the story an emotional through line. And the voice performances, particularly in the Japanese dub, do a lot of heavy lifting to make these characters feel more alive than the writing sometimes allows. But here's where I have to be straight with you, because a lot of the criticism around this show is fair, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention it. The biggest issue is pacing. 12 episodes is simply not enough room to adapt this story properly, and it shows. Character development that should land with real weight instead feels rushed or compressed. Emotional beats that work in the source material sometimes arrive here without enough setup to fully land the way they're supposed to. The animation, while strong in places, is inconsistent. There are noticeable dips in quality during some of the larger action sequences, including one castle assault sequence in particular that a lot of viewers have pointed to as a rough patch. The premise sets up something dark and high stakes, but a chunk of the middle episodes lean into more standard high school academy dynamics, which can feel like a slight tonal mismatch against the weight of what Desir is actually carrying. None of this makes the show bad. But it does mean the anime, as it currently stands, feels like a solid but compressed introduction to a story that clearly has a lot more depth waiting in the source material than 12 episodes could ever fully capture. So where does that leave us? A Returner's Magic Should Be Special has one of the more interesting premises in recent fantasy anime, and Desir's team-building approach to regression is a genuinely fresh angle for the genre. But the execution doesn't always rise to meet that premise. Pacing issues, some inconsistent animation, and characters that don't always get the space they need hold this back from being something truly special. If you're a fan of Korean web novel adaptations, regression stories, or you just want something with a genuinely emotional core underneath some familiar fantasy trappings, it's worth watching. The good news is that Season 2 is confirmed, premiering October 2026, with the same studio and full staff returning, which gives this story a real chance to slow down, breathe, and do justice to material the first season didn't have room for. My verdict? A solid, flawed watch with real heart at its center. Not a must-watch, but a worthwhile one.
Bye-bye!